What's up, everyone? This is Destroyer229, and today I want to go over a bit of a discussion that I've been seeing a lot of recently with the release of Leagues. Now, with Leagues Catalyst coming out, there's been a lot of renewed interest in RuneScape 3, especially from old school players. And there's been a lot of talk about what people like about RuneScape 3, what they dislike about RuneScape 3, and what I want to talk about today is something that I've seen pop up quite a bit since Leagues came out. Now, if you talk to any sort of discussion when it comes to old school players, there's mostly going to be talk about why they don't like RuneScape 3, and a lot of it tends to be microtransactions. Some of it deals with cosmetics. You also have interfaces, and honestly, a lot of those issues have already been addressed, like with interface sharing, or are being addressed right now when it comes to a lot of the microtransaction experiments. But another pillar that I've seen pop up occasionally from time to time, but has been really amplified since the first week of Leagues, is the effect of dailies. Now, the problem when it comes to a lot of discussion tends to be what exactly defines a daily. Because generally speaking, anyone that I've seen talk about this, whether it's YouTube videos or just Reddit threads, generally speaking, they just refer to dailies as just this all-encompassing thing. There's not really anything beside just a couple of examples. And the other problem when it comes to dailies is that, typically speaking, you have two camps. You either have people who want to get rid of all dailies, or people who say, suck it up, you don't have to do them if you don't want to. And the problem is that both sides are really not helpful in terms of the discussion. For one, if we're going with the people who get rid of dailies, the problem is that whenever I hear people say, get rid of all dailies, I immediately think they have no idea what they're talking about. A lot of what this discussion goes into deals more specifically with Gnomonkey's recent video. He has a lot of interesting takes about the current scenario and also just what he thought of RuneScape 3 in Leagues. I'll go ahead and leave a link to the video in the description. But one thing that he was kind of talking about that honestly kind of pissed me off a little bit was RuneScape 3 needs to get rid of all dailies, and RuneScape 3 players need to demand more kind of respect. Respect's not the right word. But basically demand higher quality stuff from Jagex. And honestly, that pisses me off a lot because we do fight for this sort of thing. And that was most easily seen when it came to Hero Pass. Hero Pass was basically the breaking point for so many RuneScape 3 players when it came to a lot of the stuff. And there were two main points that Hero Pass severely screwed up that caused people to basically have the massive backlash that it did. First was having tangible rewards from microtransaction events. Things like the Clue Scroll reward or having reduced damage in the Zamorakian Undercity. Those were really big tangible rewards that were locked behind a microtransaction event, something that we hadn't really seen before and was a line that a lot of players thought was crossed. But the other avenue was simply it replacing daily challenges. A daily. It's in the name itself. So many people love daily challenges. It's a very quick thing. It takes 2 minutes to do and you get a nice chunk of XP for your efforts. Even when it comes to something like Iron Man where you don't even get treasure hunter keys, people wanted their daily challenges back. And eventually we managed to bully Jagex into bringing back daily challenges while also being able to get rid of all of those tangible rewards. We do fight back against predatory practices. It's also why we have the experiments going on, because this has been something that we have been wanting for a long time now. And with a lot more evidence from old school players, that desire is only been strengthened. So to hear people basically say that dailies themselves are reductive and are actively harmful and is something that we need to demand gets rid of It makes me think that you have not been paying attention to anything, because this was something that we do like. Part of the RuneScape 3 community does enjoy these sorts of daily challenges. Not just daily challenges, just dailies in general. And that's not even going over things where dailies are generally seen as more of a consequence, kind of more of a restriction to make sure anything doesn't get too overpowered. We'll go over that in a bit, but things like, say, Crystal Flask or Red Sandstone, those things have limits for a reason. And if they didn't have limits, they would either be very annoying to try to get, to the point that you'd only really have, like, gold farmers and bots really doing them, or everyone would be doing them and they would basically have zero net worth. So it's one of those things where I hear all of these things basically going, dailies aren't ruining anything, get rid of all dailies, and it just really feels like you haven't been paying attention to the game at all. Now, granted, I am on more the side of, if it's not fun, don't bother with it. If you are spending so much time worrying about what is the most efficient method that it is actively harming your experience of the game, you really need to take a step back and just not worry about that. Fun should be paramount, and if you optimize the fun out of the game, obviously you're not going to have a good time. Now, the sort of reasoning does fall a little bit flat when you have a limited game mode like Leagues, where time is of the essence, so trying to optimize the best path is part of the point. So, from that perspective, I can totally see why you would really want to try to make sure you do these sorts of things, because it's going to be the best way to get money, to get experience, and be able to get as far in Leagues in the fastest way possible. So from that perspective, I can see where that burnout is coming from, and saying just don't do it can be pretty much seen as insulting. But in terms of the main game, it is just one of those things where you don't necessarily need to do every single thing that's efficient. I've seen what people in old school are capable of. Being able to 3-tick your way through mining rocks or chopping trees and be able to fletch or alch at the same time and be able to be very in-depth and very in tune with the tick system. I've seen what people are able to be capable of. So it's just one of those things where it's weird that it's a bit different, and that kind of breaks people's brains, especially if they really want to get as much XP as possible while actively playing the game. Because, honestly, if you're trying to be as efficient as possible, the best way to do that is just spending real money. Let's hope that changes, but as of right now, that is technically the most efficient way of doing it, so, yeah. But simply just leaving it at, just don't do it, is again, not exactly helpful with the conversation. It's been said 1,000 times before, it'll be said 1,000 times again, it doesn't really contribute to the conversation itself. So what I want to do for the rest of the video is basically play devil's advocate. What I'm going to do is, I'm going to take a look at the repeatable events that the RuneScape wiki mentions, as well as maybe a few others that maybe it doesn't, and kind of offer my thoughts. Whether it should stay as a repeatable event, if it can be retooled to something that isn't a daily, or if it's something that honestly should just be gotten rid of entirely. What I want to try to do is avoid just eliminating content as much as possible. If we are going to get rid of something, I would rather it be replaced with something else. Kind of like what we saw recently with Tuska. Anima Islands were removed entirely, and a lot of the rewards that it had were moved to existing content, like moving devotion and sacrifice to one piercing note, or introducing new content, like introducing the Beastmaster Hounds for things like Tuska's Wrath and the War Preset. Basically, I want to try to cut down on as many dailies as possible and see if there are certain dailies, and this also includes things like weeklies and monthlies as well, it's just kind of under the broad umbrella of dailies. I want to see if I can cut down as much as possible and see if we can't try to mitigate some of that sort of min-maxing mentality, kind of meeting old school players halfway, while hopefully they can just meet in the middle going, okay, yes, there is some repeatable content that unfortunately does exist. Because old school does also have repeatable content. Things like Burnt Sand, you've got the Battle Staves from Zaf, you've got the Tears of Guthix. Old school does have some repeatable content that also just constitutes as dailies. It's just that most of the content that's been like that is more so legacy content. It's stuff that was there from the 2007 backups, and most of the stuff that's been introduced since old school's introduction is tended to stay away from that. So old school has some dailies, so it should not be kept to, we should eliminate all dailies from RuneScape 3 if old school doesn't even do that. So again, main point is, let's play devil's advocate. Let's see if we can cut down on dailies. So right now I have the distractions and diversions page from the RuneScape wiki up. I have this as well as the repeatable events just so that way we can go over all of those. And I'm starting with distractions and diversions because the entire premise is just repeatable content based on real life time. There's dailies, there's weeklies, there's monthlies. It's kind of the whole epitome of the whole dailies argument. So we're going to start with just going through all of the D&Ds. I believe the list goes through in alphabetical order. Like we can see here with the list of all D&Ds. Yeah, it looks to be alphabetical. So we'll just go through that list there. And then we'll move on over to the repeatable events section and just kind of go over some of the other straggler content that isn't qualified as a D&D. So first things first is Ogoroth. Now, Ogoroth is a weekly D&D that you can go, you kill it twice a week, and you can get black pearls that give bonus XP, or just straight up cash. What I can very easily see with Ogoroth, and I'll go over this a little bit more detail when we eventually get to Bork, what I kind of foresee with Ogoroth is being more of a beginner level boss. That sort of content isn't really fully fleshed out in RuneScape 3. You have Zero Mechanic Arc Glacier, you've got things like the Giant Mole and KBD, but there aren't really too many real beginner level bosses. So Ogoroth, and by extension Bork, could also be kind of good introduction bosses for that purpose. Like I said, I'll go over that a bit later with Bork because there's a lot more stuff that we can go into with that. But we can just simply change this to simply be a regular early game boss. Next is Balthasar Beauregard's Big Top Bonanza, otherwise called the Circus. And the Circus is one of the oldest D&Ds in the entire game. D&Ds came out, I believe it said September of 2008. Yeah, September 2nd, 2008. And the Circus was one of those original ones, alongside the Shooting Stars and Penguins. And honestly, these three really should stay. They are some of the oldest content in the game. They've been around since the RuneScape 2 era. And a lot of these just simply are just super enforced within just RuneScape itself. The Circus has gotten a few additions when it comes to the thieving and the fire-making aspects. Shooting Stars recently got a whole refresh and is also just available in old school. And honestly, Shooting Stars, for all intents and purposes, they aren't really dailies. You can do 3 of them in a given day and they're 2 hours apart. So honestly, most people, that isn't really just a straight daily. That's just a regular training method. And then Penguins are some of the they're some of the most community-focused group in the game. And one of the oldest community groups that's still active. There are so many people that still go hunting penguins, making sure that they're trapped, and being able to make sure people get their points. World 60 Pengs is one of the oldest groups, and it's a good community group in a game that consistently becomes more and more focused on solo play. So there's a lot of good that comes from these different events, and they really do deserve to stay. And simply just being, well, locked to the content that they already are just feels integral to what they are in general. So honestly, just keeping those three, especially since they are the original three, I think is perfectly fine. Next, we have the Big Chinchompa. Now, the Big Chinchompa, it's a daily. It gives a decent amount of Hunter XP, but honestly, this one could just simply be repurposed to simply just being a training method. Just another Hunter area. You could potentially introduce some interesting aspects, like maybe the portals could lead to, like, a Hunter guild. Potentially, the Big Chinchompa could be a skilling boss. It could be just repurposed, kind of like a more beginner level one, since Crosis is in a really late game area, and Gate of Elidinus has a lot of requirements. So simply repurposing the Big Chinchompa to be a more early game skilling boss wouldn't be a bad idea. Predominantly focused on Hunter, but you've also got a few other things you can add, like fletching and woodcutting and a few other things as well. Champions Challenge. That is very technical for repeatable. You can re-challenge the champions, but the XP that you get is pretty pitiful. So I've already done a hotspot on Champions Challenge. It was the very first one. So if you're interested in that, you can go ahead and check out the card, or you can check it out towards the end of the video. But honestly, there's not really a whole lot of things that people really go back to Champions Challenge for. It's mostly just getting the scrolls themselves. Most people don't really bother with doing it again. Next is court cases, and court cases really shouldn't be here. Because unlike Champions Challenge, there's no way to actually repeat these. They're essentially like clue scrolls that are dropped from any number of monsters, but then you can't repeat them for any additional rewards. So there's not really anything here. They're really just kind of the outlier here. They're only a distraction and diversion because you get it from a drop and go, ooh, shiny. Let's maybe go and do this. So they fit the technical definition, but they don't really fit with what they've become. So next is deep sea fishing, and mostly when it comes to that, it's just more so just the random events. It's kind of like court cases where they're a distraction based on the skilling activity. And really, besides the traveling merchant, which is something that we'll go into a bit more detail later, but a lot of these just more so feel like random events that happen during specific training in this area. And honestly, a lot of things that we are going to talk about, especially the next one with demon flash mobs, that is something that I think could be simply repurposed for some of these dailies. Basically turning what is a daily occurrence and instead making them more a random occurrence in specific areas. That might be something that can cut down on the dailies, as now you're not on a timer. It's something that needs to be actively activated. Of course, deep sea fishing, no one has to be there for the random events to activate, so that's a little bit different. But treating it similar to that, or from old school, treating it like the forestry events, where just random events happen so long as you are training a skill in a specific area. So something like that, I think, is something that we're going to see a bit more of. Speaking of which, demon flash mobs. So demon flash mobs, we'll throw goblin flash mobs as well, because conceptually they're the same thing. These can just be repurposed to simply being random events in certain areas. So let's say that you're mining somewhere, or you're cutting somewhere, or you're digging up from an archaeology area. Sometimes when things happen, you have either goblins for lower level areas or demons for the higher level areas. And these, they just show up, and then you can choose to either engage with them, so fight them in order to get different rewards, or you can just leave them alone and not bother to do anything with them. These should always be more of a random occurrence that can only give you benefits, not something that would necessarily be detrimental to you. So with the demon flash mobs, yeah, for higher level areas, you just go and fight the demons, and for the goblin flash mobs, or goblin raids, these are just lower level things, lower leveled equivalent of the same thing, in which it's a combat focused random event. So they're no longer triggered on a timer, they're simply triggered by people actively training in a given area. I think that would cut down on just the daily occurrence of these things. And also cut down on broadcasts, which I'm sure a lot of people would be more grateful for. Next is the Effigy Incubator. This, I'm pretty sure, is going to be the only monthly that we're really going to see any changes for. And mostly that's because the Effigy Incubator already has a means of training it outside of the regular monthly event. It's just not very good, and the XP is just really terrible. But you can do that in order to get different points that you can then exchange for other effigies or for effigy pets. So honestly, just repurposing the incubator to simply be a training area and nerfing the XP rates proportionally, that I think would probably be fine to just change it to be a regular training spot. And it would just be something for the regular 4 skills that are there, for crafting, for smithing, for rune crafting, and for invention. And you can even include a lot of the effigy fragments that are also included in this. So just getting all of the fragments, I'm not even really sure that it shows it here on the page. But being able to just do those, and maybe those not only just double the amount of materials like they currently do, but also give you a greatly expanded XP buff, kind of like the rates currently are, but just lowering the frequency of them. I think that would just be an interesting way to also just throw in random events for training purposes. After all, random events no longer exist in RuneScape 3, so just simply having some means of being able to have some sort of interesting thing happening during your training is going to be a plus. And if we can just change some of these up as possible to facilitate that, I think that would go a long way to just cut down on these dailies. Next we have the Evil Tree. The Evil Tree could, in theory, just kind of stay as it is, but we could also just make it into another one of these random events that happen. Of course, Evil Tree is very much intrinsic to woodcutting. Could also be triggered from farming as well. I mean, there's a ton of tree farming patches, and you do have to facilitate the growth of the tree. Farming is the first stage of these as well, so that is always an option, just for more random events that can occur just through regular training areas. And similar to like the demon flash mobs, you could have just lower level trees in the lower level areas, and the higher level trees in higher level areas. So, or just, since it doesn't really quite work for farming, because farming can just plant anything anywhere, it could also just be based on what the player themselves that spawns it. And by that, I mean, like, triggers from it, like, say, like the random event timer in Old School. Or from Forestry, where a player technically spawns in the event that happens. So, something similar to that for the Evil Tree, I think would work decently well. And at the very least, again, just cut down on just daily things. Familiarization is also a very interesting one. It could simply be just an alternative way to train summoning, as opposed to just getting stuff that helps you in summoning. So a lot of it could just be repurposed to just be a low input, no reward sort of way to train up summoning. So just simply removing that timer aspect of it. Instead, the consequence for being spied on through familiars that are going after you could be just a decrease in your XP rates. So something like that could simply be repurposed to, again, just be a regular training method. Fish Flingers is honestly already saddling the line of, should this really be considered a daily? And that's simply because you get so many tickets for these. You get 2 free tickets a day, you get a ton of tickets just from regular fishing purposes. This is a daily in the very loosest sense of the word, and honestly, you could simply remove the tickets to enter, and nothing would change. Nothing realistically would change from this. It takes 20 minutes to go through a game, 10 minutes for the game itself, 5-minute cooldown period, 5-minute entering the period. And so there's not really a whole lot more you could really do. And honestly, just, yeah, you could get rid of the tickets and nothing would really change. People already can stockpile a ton of these, to the point that you really don't need to keep any sort of limit. And people are still going to be after this through trim comp requirements. So people are still going to be going through this as just a regular training purpose. Whether that's to get the fishing outfit or the tackle box, you're gonna still have people go over this. So honestly, just removing the tickets and changing nothing else, and you'll probably be fine. So next is the Giant Oyster, and that I really don't think you can really change all too much. It's just a monthly event where you can get some kind of fast fishing and farming XP, and then get 1 month later, you get basically the equivalent of a hard clue scroll reward. So honestly, not really a whole lot to say. It's just a nice little bonus, and it's just one of those things where monthlies really occur so infrequently, or they are specifically balanced around the fact that they happen so infrequently that really it doesn't work if you don't have that restriction. Otherwise, it just becomes broken as hell. So it really has to just stay as is, and a lot of people love the Giant Oyster just for that random chance reward. People love clue scrolls, and people love getting a die or a piece of Third Age. So it's honestly not really all too bad, and really can just stay. Gobi supply runs can very easily just get rid of this. The unfortunate thing with Mazcab is very much neglected content. Another hotspot I've done has been dealing specifically with raids and how to basically try to bring that back to some sort of narrative conclusion. But supply runs, yeah, not really the most helpful thing. You can get some experience for it, but honestly, you could probably just get rid of it. I'm sure a lot of people won't even really notice. God statues. God statues are another one of those monthlies that I feel is really hard to get rid of. You've got a lot of really good construction XP, and then your choice of either Prayer or Slayer. All of those can be really annoying skills to train, especially on an Iron Man. So it's really hard to say, let's just get rid of this. Now, because there's not really any other way to do it. Like, if you just have, like, oh, let's just construct our own statue. How is that any different from, say, Fort 4 and 3? Or construction contracts? It's not really going to change anything that isn't already in the game and already done to a better degree. So it's another one of those things where it doesn't really hurt anything. It happens infrequently enough that people just kind of do it at the first of the month and then forget about it. So not really anything too worrisome about there. Next is the Guthixian Cache. And this is one of the big ones that a lot of old school players have a problem with, especially with leagues, because for a lot of people, this is generally just the exclusive way that you train divination. Divination is pretty slow otherwise, and so doing caches is generally seen as the most efficient way of being able to train divination. And when you have to basically go in every single hour, that becomes a lot more cumbersome for a lot of people to try to do. So, could we change this? Yes, I think we can. I think we can change Guthixian caches to just be a more intense, but more rewarding version of getting divination experience. And pretty much it's just the same thing. You can either just go and put memories into the pit, or you can transform into Krez and subdue the automatons. Basically just keeping the same thing that it already does, but trying to treat it more so as either a minigame or just simply treating it as just a regular training method. Something that can be more of a community focus event that's just always available. Obviously, nerf the XP rates to make sure that it's balanced. And then just as you're going through it, you just have random chances of also getting the Diviner's outfit, since that's how you get that outfit. So I think that this could be changed to just be a more high-intensity divination method, but becomes a lot more rewarding in terms of XP per hour, as opposed to just gathering wisps. Next is Irby Werby. Irby Werby, I think, is also another thing that you could probably just change to just be a regular training method. You can just change it to, instead of just beating up ancient Zygomites to grab the freaking herbs, you can instead just be a way to get some farming XP through growing the green herbs, fire making for just trying to burn the corrupted ones, and of course herblore XP, since that's also just kind of in the name and also the real reason that you're doing this. So just cultivating all this stuff. There could be some random events that happen where you have the Zygomites kind of rushing towards the center, and you can get extra herblore or fire making XP depending on which herbs that you go and assist with. Either you take the herb and you light it on fire, so you get fire making XP, or you just take the healthy herbs and you get bonus herblore XP. So how it works now would be closer to how a random event portion of this new training method would go. So that is one way you can do it. Obviously, you'd need to change the point system, so then that way the rewards that you get, especially the totem pieces and the herb bag, those could just simply be done in a regular shop. There's plenty of those that already exist in the game, like the Crux Equal points, or just the player-owned farm points for beans. So that is something that I think could just be changed for that as well. Memory of Nomad. Very simple. Make Nomad into a boss. Simply just treating it as a regular boss as opposed to a D&D, I think is probably going to be the best way to go about this. So this would come with its own drops. I think that the different capes that you can get as well would just simply be rewards for hitting those times. And honestly, you've already gone to different supplies. You can just be the drop table. Add in a few extra commons as well. And I think what you can do with Nomad is make it basically a beginner portion of multi-phase bosses. So something like Solik, something like Telos, Nomad could very easily just be a beginner portion of that. Rather than treating it as a diversion and distraction, treat it as an introduction for these multi-phase bosses. So that way players can get a taste of how these will function. It already pretty much goes like that anyway with how the distraction diversion works. Just turn it into a regular boss that you can just do on a regular basis. Update the rewards accordingly so that way it makes sense for regular drop table, and you're pretty much good. Nomad is probably one of the most recognizable characters within RuneScape 3. So it makes sense to just turn him into a regular boss as opposed to just relegating him to a distraction and diversion. Next is Premier Vault. This I'm not really considering just because this is something that not all players have access to. It's simply Premier members. It is simply a perk of that. So not really applicable. Next is the Phoenix Lair. And this is another one that I think we could probably just change into a regular training portion. You've got the different reborn monsters that you can have just as regular combat. You could also turn these into various Slayer creatures as well. Maybe not introducing a Slayer level, but at the very least, having the reborn monsters be Slayer tasks. But then you also have the main Phoenix area where you can just go, you can get fletching XP for just trimming the trees, crafting XP to just weaving them, and fire making XP to kind of keep a pyre lit. One thing that you could probably do in order to just really facilitate a lot of these things would simply be to kind of treat these like we do with the holiday events. Maybe just a more AFK but low XP method of being able to train fletching, crafting, and fire making, while also keeping the reborn monster areas for Slayer purposes. I think just updating that in order to just be this sort of kind of the opposite of what I was talking about before with Guthixie and Caches, it being a more AFK-able way to train any number of different skills. Honestly, not too dissimilar for how the Effigy Incubator really works, but a lot more easily accessible and a lot less XP per hour. The Rune Goldberg machine is next, and this is another one of those things where the daily comes simply from balancing purposes. Rune Goldberg machine is a way to basically sync runes, simply because you can just put in a ton of different runes and be able to get Viswax, which can then be used for aura extenders, daily challenge extenders or rerolls, fast teleports with lodestones. There's a lot of good things that you can use Viswax for, and again, it syncs runes, which keep runes more profitable. So being able to just put in infinite amount of runes for infinite amount of Viswax just doesn't work and would just completely kill the price and also just really imbalance a lot of other content. So this is one that there's a lot of good stuff that goes into it. There's a lot of money makers as well that comes from this. It has to have that restriction in order for it to function. And there's a lot of good uses for it to prevent it from just being, just get rid of the whole thing. You would piss off a lot of people if you just got rid of it. Next is the Rune Sphere. This is already pretty much just a random event anyway. So, not really anything worth changing. It already pretty much functions the way that a random event would do. The only thing that makes it a daily is that you are capped in the amount of rune dust that you can get per day. So, simply just possibly lowering the amount of rune dust that you get from siphoning it in exchange for just being able to do it all the time might be a fair enough trade-off. But honestly, this already pretty much functions as a random event through training in the rune span. Next is Rush of Blood. Rush of Blood, I think the only way that you can really make this not into a daily would be to simply redesign it to be another Slayer dungeon. Basically treating it like Curadel's Dungeon 2.0, I think is the only real way of being able to make this into any sort of regular content. You could also simply just remove the restrictions on the reward space and just anytime you go after it, you get the rewards. Which, kind of the problem is just simply there's a lot of stuff that's tied to, like, completionists. So it's kind of hard to really get rid of that. Especially since you would just be replacing it with something that already exists to an extent. So honestly, it's fine staying the way that it is. There's not really a whole lot that you can do that wouldn't just simply get rid of the content or would just be seen as lazy. Sinkholes can easily be repurposed like the demon flash mobs to simply just be random events that happen while you're skilling. As you're doing your various skills, a random sinkhole opens up, you go through it, you do a few skilling tasks in the sinkhole, you get some rewards, you get some skills in the things that were in the mini little sinkhole, as well as some dungeoneering experience and some dungeoneering tokens. Pretty easy to do, just rebalance it to simply be, well, a lot shorter. So obviously the XP rates would be a lot less, as opposed to it being a competitive aspect to it. Tears of Gothics, leave alone. This exists in old school, it can exist here. Treasure Trails, leave it alone. It's already not really a daily and is only really distraction and diversion and going, ooh, look at this weird thing I got. So again, leave it alone. Troll Invasion doesn't really work if you don't have the restriction. Honestly, one thing that you could do would be to rebalance it and kind of treat it a lot more like an introduction to wave-based content. So a easier version of the fight caves, but also just make it tougher so it actually feels like it's training the player and not just be a cakewalk for anyone that isn't just fresh off the tutorial. Because honestly, Troll Invasion, super easy. You get a lot of good XP for a reward. Honestly, you kind of have to change it for a more wave-based one. Otherwise, it just becomes way too broken, or it gets nerfed to hell and becomes dead content. So, either leave it alone, or try to update it to be a more teaching tool for the player. Next is the Pit. The Pit is also pretty much already a random event sort of thing. You are limited in how many times you can go into it if you're not level 99. If you are level 99, you can go as many times as you want. So honestly, not really a big deal, and already is treated like a random event sort of thing anyway. So, not really too big, aside from just getting rid of the daily restriction, and even then, I don't think you really lose out on too much. Especially with how rigged the games are in the Pit. Wilderness Flash events, another big one, and this one is really hard to try to balance, especially since a lot of the stuff is really recent and has already been under some nerfs before. And it's still really good. It's still really good money and really good experience. So it is really difficult to being able to just mitigate this sort of thing. I think probably one of the things that you could do would simply be to either make it either money-based reward or XP-based reward. That way a lot of stuff isn't as lucrative. Although things like the Lava Strike Worm and also the specialty stuff like the Infernal Star, you'd still get the really wild rewards because, you know, that's also just kind of the whole reason that you do those. Part of it would just be eliminating a bit of the usefulness, but ultimately that doesn't really change the core premise of this. It still has to be a daily, unless you restrict how many of these you can do in a given day, in which case nobody's going to do any of the non-special tasks unless they're just doing it to unlock teleports, in which case they may as well not even exist in the first place. So it's really hard to try to balance this stuff that isn't just these are daily events. Now, one thing maybe we could try to do would be that these are simply just random events that happen if you're doing any sort of skilling event in the wilderness. If you're doing any sort of training, if you are killing monsters, if you are catching butterflies, if you are... What other skilling events are there in the wilderness? If you're cutting bloodwood trees, then these special events might just happen and you can just get the rewards as well. These might be able to just be changed to just be random events, just from anything in the wilderness. Aside from that, though, I cannot see any way that you can do this otherwise. Otherwise, it has to be like this for the purpose that it basically makes. So, really hard to do otherwise, but otherwise, it's just pretty much there to stay. Warbands, though... Warbands honestly could probably just go. Any sort of PvP content in RuneScape 3 is really only used by griefers. Warbands are definitely one of them. You're either part of a clan that just does these all the time, or you're a target. And that's it. That's pretty much the only things that are available through warbands. So, honestly, there's a lot more accessible things that you can do. And I think the flash events honestly do a much better job than warbands. They're a lot more interesting. So I think you could probably just get rid of this. And you'd have a lot of people that would be pissed. But honestly, I think more people would enjoy the flash events more than warbands. And finally, we have Wisps of the Grove. Wisps of the Grove. I honestly don't really know too much about this one because I don't really go to the Lost Grove all that often. So honestly, this one, I don't really have much of an opinion on. This is one of the more recent ones, and I just don't do this one. So honestly, not really sure about this one, if I'm being completely honest. Let me know if you have any sort of ideas on what to do with this one, because I genuinely have no idea. We also have two more things here. We've got Triskelions, which are just clue scrolls. And then Shattered Heart, which are no longer dailies. They got rid of the time restriction on both versions of Shattered Heart. So, not really much of an issue with these anymore. So now we have the repeatable events. So these are just things that would also be classified as dailies that people would also point to, but aren't classified as distractions and diversions. Obviously, D&Ds are a part of here, so if we just kind of move on. The first thing is Serenity Posts. This is basically just AFK agility training. So either we nerf the XP to hell to make it not really worth it at all, or we get rid of the content. That is pretty much it. Unless we just keep it as is. And honestly, like, the only other way that we do this is that we treat this the same way that we treat the bikes as well that are located near the Archaeology Guild, in which case you get X amount of XP and then you can't do it ever again. So, I honestly don't like that option. I really don't like any of the other options because it just kills most interest in it. Granted, a lot of the ways that this is really helpful is just being an AFK way to get a lot of rolls to get the agility pet. So the daily XP is generally just kind of there to be your general limit. Honestly, I'm just kind of fine with this as is. But if we had to make it no longer a daily, we'd have to severely nerf this. Because otherwise, it's just completely AFK. The next is Crystal Tree Blossoms. There are actually quite a few just dailies that are in Prifddinas. Crystal Tree Blossoms, though, we can easily just change this. If they give a lot more Crystal Tree Blossoms in exchange for the tree disappearing once they are picked, like the money tree. If we just do that, as well as just having additional ways to get crystal acorns that aren't just stupidly rare, I think this would actually work to just be a decent way to get farming XP and to get a decently rare herb lore ingredient. So that one could honestly be changed to no longer be a daily and just be another thing that you can just farm. Next is Divine Locations. These do just have general limits. I think one thing that kind of makes them not really all that great is generally the input that you have to do. You have to put in quite a bit in order to actually make these. And one reason that they're not really super helpful is simply because you do have to just put in a lot of stuff to get then more of the same stuff back. And while you usually get more stuff, you do also have divination energy. And so, part of me just wants to get rid of the limit and it would probably be fine. Especially since you could just sell these to other players via the Grand Exchange, and you could probably make a decent amount of money on that if people want to get quick XP and resources. It could honestly be a decent way to just increase the XP. The only thing that I would probably be weary about would be making any of these changes while any of this stuff is still available on Treasure Hunter. If they're ever taken off Treasure Hunter, or if Treasure Hunter just goes away entirely, I'd be perfectly okay with just removing the restrictions on these and not really changing a whole lot of anything else. Probably the higher end stuff then just has a shorter time limit, which I think they generally do anyway. So honestly, that could easily just be removed and you just get rid of one more daily. The Jack of Trades aura kind of doesn't work if it can be done indefinitely. That's just a ton of stuff that you can just get really easily and a lot of just free XP that you get. So you kind of need to have the restriction on that, otherwise it just doesn't work. And a lot of people use the Jack of Trades aura, so that is something that a lot of people really don't want to see go. Assist system. I don't think anyone really uses the assist system anymore. You'll probably see some niche cases, but generally speaking, no one uses this. Soul Reaper. Soul Reaper tends to be lumped in with a lot of dailies, and to be fair, the free Soul Reaper tasks are, but you can go and get more if you have either just a scroll that you can get, or if you just buy the ability to get more through spending Slayer points. So being able to just get a lot more of this stuff, I mean, it already kind of saddles the line between what could be considered a daily. But if we really wanted to, we could just simply remove the daily restriction on this and have it potentially just be a gold sink if you get more than one per day, instead of being a Slayer point sink. So ultimately, we just kind of turn this from a Slayer point sink into a gold sink, which honestly probably wouldn't be a bad thing, all things considered. Probably would crash Hydrixes though. So that could be a problem. That is one way that people generally make their money, is just doing these things to get Hydrixes. So otherwise, they crash pretty hard. But if we really didn't care too much about that, then yes, we can just change this to be a gold sink as opposed to a Slayer point sink, and then that pretty much gets rid of the daily aspect. The only thing else that would be daily would simply just being the free one per day. But hey, if you can just spend gold to get more of these things, then people will go and do that. Next is the Jade Vine, and honestly, it's pretty much just farming. Like, it technically constitutes as a daily, but honestly, the Jade Vine is pretty much the equivalent of Vespora, although significantly weaker than Vespora. This thing really is not all that strong nowadays. So, honestly, it really doesn't matter all that much. Yes, it's technically a daily, but it's really just farming. It really just follows the same premise as farming. So, honestly, I don't think it really matters. But next is Bork. So, going back to Astaroth. So, what exactly can we do with Bork and... Ogoroth. So what can we do with Bork and Ogoroth? So one thing that I was thinking that we could kind of kill two birds with one stone is essentially trying to create more new player-friendly bosses. Now, not necessarily new off of Tutorial Island, but more just early game bosses. Things like the Giant Mole and the King Black Dragon and Zero Mechanic Arc Glacior. Just having more variety in terms of low-level bosses that people can kill. What I was kind of thinking on would be updating Bork and Ogoroth and simply kind of making them just style-specific, similar to the vein of Hermond. So Hermond is just simply a pretty early game necromancy exclusive boss. But if we just kind of update some of these other, I guess, dailies and turn them into low-level bosses, we can basically just try to treat them as style-specific. So, like, for example, Bork could be the magic one. The armor deflects any sort of melee attack or ranged weapon, and he can only be harmed with magic. Or you have Ogoroth, in which it has a magical barrier against it that protects it from any projectile, so you have to get rid of it using melee. And then we introduce a third one that's completely brand new that would have some sort of protection that can only be penetrated through ranged. So having these sorts of style specific and just kind of having these things kind of just be more introductory versions of things similar to Hermond. They have their own sort of mechanics, so we update Bork to kind of have those. We update Ogoroth, so that way the quest version's pretty easy, but then you have the actual boss version that's a little bit more difficult and more style specific. And we can even kind of have where the rewards can be a little bit of a gimmick. So like Bork has a lot higher charm chance dropping, which gets even more lucrative when you complete the Mighty Fall. You have Ogoroth, in which it frequently drops Black Pearls that can reward bonus XP. The XP from the Black Pearl in this case would need to be nerfed if it's going to be a bit more common, but would still be a sort of unique reward. And some of the other unique drops that they have would be things like pets, and also things that could help out in more style-specific upgrades along the way. So I'm thinking close to level 50 to level 60, or something that's more specific to just trying to kill the boss itself, kind of similar to old school's Scurious. A lot of these sorts of levels tend to be generally skipped through just because experience in RuneScape 3 is a lot faster, but having something that could potentially help players out a bit more just on that journey, I think would help out quite a bit. Even if it's only just for, like, sort of gimmicky things, like just getting the charms, or getting the Black Pearl, or just some other third thing for a brand new boss. I think that sort of thing could work out pretty well with trying to mitigate these things as dailies, and again, just bring in more bosses. We focus so much in terms of close to endgame bosses and trying to push what exactly is the cap, but I think introducing more of these lower tiered bosses is always a good thing. It's always good to have variety in things that you kill, otherwise you're just gonna get bored killing the same thing over and over and over again. Next we have Sandstone. This is what I mentioned earlier, in which it's only a daily in order to balance it. So red sandstone is basically used to create flasks. So being able to basically turn these into robust glass that could then be used to create these flasks. These are really good for herblore because they hold 6 doses of potions. And then you also have the crystal flecked ones, which allow for combination potions, which are also needed for high-end herblore stuff. So simply just getting rid of it, like a lot of people say, removes one of the core parts of late-game herblore just usage, and really hampers PVM as well. So there are a few ways that we could go about if we wanted to remove these being a daily, none of which I think are really good. You could just simply remove the requirement. That just kind of kills any sort of restrictions on these things, though. Some people might think that's a good thing. Other people would just simply think that that would just be a bit more overpowered. Especially with the amount of XP that you could potentially get. Some of it could just be done to that. You do also have to consider the actual pricing of these things. If you make these indefinite, these will just crash hard. So that basically kills any sort of money-making potential from this. You could always make the process a lot more tedious to try to do, but that also just becomes really anti-player and only would really apply to just bots and gold farmers really doing it. So you don't really have too many good options of being able to do this. You either kill any sort of fun or you kill any sort of profitability. So these are just fine staying as is. Next is Miscellanea. That's also an old school. No problems at all with that. Collecting a Gorojo card. That's technically a daily. Not really super great. Most of the time you just get the Dungeoneering wild card anyway. And if you already have a Dungeoneering wild card in your bank, then you can't get more. So, honestly, it's not... I mean, technically speaking, yeah, it is a daily, but, doesn't really help you out too much. Okay, we're starting to get to a few of the task or achievement diary stuff. So there are a ton of achievement diary rewards, which is just claim free stuff daily. You've got the Tolkol stuff. You've got buying yak hide as well. You've got the getting the potato cacti. You've got noted pineapples and apples. Free flax. Free pure essence. Bag of lost items. So many of the tasks simply just as a reward is, hey, you get a reclaimable thing that has free stuff once a day. And a lot of these we can just change entirely. So many of these that we can just change to just be a permanent effect. So, for example, for a wizard property, instead of giving just free essence, it could simply just be a matter of, hey, anytime he teleports you to the pure essence mine, it's always going to be right next to the pure essence, as opposed to just spawning just in a lot of the more far out places. It's still helpful in terms of mining pure essence, but it's not just giving you free stuff. There are a few things that could potentially be kept, like say the bucket of sand upgrade, as well as the battle staves from the Varrock one. Again, if it's good enough for old school, it's good enough for RuneScape 3. So those can stay. But a few of these other things, like say the Tolkol, maybe instead of being able to get free Tolkol, it can instead be that you earn double the Tolkol from the fight caves. So if you beat Jed, you get double the Tolkol that you get from that. Something like that would probably go a lot more in terms of being a reward without it feeling like a daily. And you already have things like teleport to the slime pit. I mean, it constitutes that as a daily, but honestly, that just feels more like just a charge. It allows you to go somewhere in order to do a certain thing. So just changing a lot of these to being a permanent effect, I think would go a long way in cutting down just the sheer number of dailies. And if we kind of skip ahead a little bit, also have being able to receive stuff from the modified skilling outfits. So getting the modified outfit, again, simply just gives you free stuff per day. And instead of doing that, we can instead have these just provide additional benefits. Like, say, the Shaman's Headdress, instead of giving you free spirit shards, it instead not only gives you the teleports, but also be able to give you, say, a 1% chance of not using up any spirit shards whenever you create a pouch. So it still has something to the same effect, but as a passive, as opposed to just a free stuff sort of thing. Kind of going back up, though, one other thing that we're going to see a lot of are shops. Shops are very difficult to try to change out from simply being dailies, just because of how shops work in RuneScape 3. In old school, there's just a global shop. Other players can just sell stuff and buy stuff to the shops, and they just kind of have a global refresh. Whereas in RuneScape 3, shops are per player, And while you have some items that just restock over time, some only restock at reset. So, like all of the meats that are here in Uglog. So much of these are pivotal in high-level player-owned farm. All of the dinosaurs, and you've got the dragons, they all require meat. And this is the easiest way that you can get a lot of meat. And they also sell for a lot on the Grand Exchange. So these work out very well and are always going to be in high demand for high-level farming training. You turn these into a global reset, these are going to be bought out by merchant clans all the time. So it's going to be harder for general players to be able to get all the stuff that they are going to need for their farms. And that's just for player-owned farms. You've also got things like rune shops as well. Rune shops are also something that are generally done by players every single day. So being able to buy out those runes are either going to crash the rune prices tremendously or make runes just that much more annoying to try to get if you're doing things like Viswax or if you're doing high-end magic combat, which generally eats a lot of runes for things like the Fractured Staff of Armadyl spec. So the problem with a lot of shops is just the fact of how it's done. That's just a natural consequence. Now, shops should be updated because there's a lot of shops that just have zero stock, and they really should have something, even if it's low as just having 10, 5, and 1 item. But that is a problem for another time. Next is the Wicked Hood. That one, honestly, you could probably remove a lot of the other functionality and you'd probably still be fine. It still provides a lot of teleports to a ton of runecrafting altars. Being able to just get a few freebies per day and then just having Wicked Hood charges that you can get from the rune span, I think would be fine. I love the Wicked Hood, just having all of those essences just stored into it. It could also just serve as a pseudo rune pouch if you really wanted to make sure it had some functionality. But, you know what? I think it's fine the way it is, but if you wanted to remove a daily aspect, that could be something that could be done as well. Most of these are a lot more shop-based or task-based. Motherlode Maw. That only really works as a daily. That also has insane requirements. The Motherlode Maw really helps out in terms of trying to get a lot of stuff that helps out for comp and trim requirements. Could you remove this and simply just everyone would go on in their lives? Sure. But it's just one of those things where it's like a free gamble per day to try to help out in something or to get something that is really valuable. So a lot of it could be changed, but honestly, I don't see a reason why. It has such high requirements to try to do anyway. And it's honestly just a nice little reward if you're trying to aim towards comp. And if you don't care for comp, then you don't really need to worry about it too much. There's a few other things like the aquarium decorations, which, I mean, once you've got all the aquarium decorations, you don't really need it anymore. It says it's a daily, it really isn't once you get everything. Some of these things are just tasks that you do, like trying to gain Gobi reputation. Not really something that would be too bad. Like, you could probably just remove the time cap on these and just, you can do these indefinitely as opposed to just doing 3 of these tasks per day or getting a few activities in the Nemi forest. Mazcab is pretty much mostly dead content anyway. I mean, there's also just getting stuff like the Tuska War Priest said and Tuska's Wrath, but yeah, there's a lot of stuff in Mazcab that no one really does. So you could probably just remove the caps on these, and I'm sure most people won't really care. Reputation from soul obelisks. This also applies to just crunching scarabs, because these are also basically considered dailies. I don't really have too much of a problem with these because these are pretty much just random events anyway. The XP and reputation cap is generally kept for balancing purposes. So, I mean, you could remove it if you wanted to. You could nerf it if you do it. I don't have a problem with these as is. So, they're honestly fine. If you really had to do something with removing them, you could. But I think they're fine as is. Free supplies from Rosie in the Ark. Again, just free stuff. You could just get rid of that. I'm sure no one would really care all too much. Arc contracts. I didn't even realize those were dailies. But again, probably could just remove the cap and you would probably still be fine. If that seems overpowered, please let me know. And then there could probably be adjustments to that. And then finally, I mean, free necromancy supplies from Lupe. That's, again, just something that's another area task. Probably could just go with lowering her costs for some of these supplies, as opposed to just handing them out for free. So that could just be another sort of upgrade sort of thing. Next we get to weeklies, which most of these are just going to be just other stuff from distractions to diversions. Bacon, I don't really see too many people really using bacon. I mean, it's a stackable food, but it really doesn't heal all that much. Not really necessary, I don't think. The skeletal horror is something that we didn't see in the distractions and diversions, and is technically one. Surprised I didn't see that. The problem with the skeletal horror is that it really doesn't really qualify too much as a boss. And the big reason to do that is simply because you get a guaranteed elite clue scroll and it possibly becomes a master. That's a similar thing, we might see it later on in a bit for the oyster in the aquarium. That is also just a weekly free elite clue scroll that you can get. So, it's still technically a daily. I'm not sure what you would do to really change that without fundamentally changing what this is. Because otherwise the skeletal horror just becomes like a regular slayer mob. Because the skeletal horror I don't think really qualifies to the same level as being a boss. Unlike something that you can make with Bork or Algaroth or Nomad. So, skeletal horror probably would have to be the same as is. I'm not sure how exactly you would change that without just completely killing its viability, or the only thing that people really care about it. Hanky points, not even entirely really sure what you really need these for. I mean, pretty much it's just extra thieving XP that you can get within the thieving guild. So, it's something, I guess. But I do not hear anyone ever talk about hanky points or anything with the thieving guild beyond just unlocking safe cracking. So, I'm not entirely sure that's really a necessary thing to really change. Citadels. They should be updated. Good God, do they deserve to be updated. Kind of hard to not make these just a weekly, though. Clan maintenance is just a nice little skilling plot that you can do. Some socialization with your clan. Not really a bad thing, if I'm being honest. Anything that really facilitates socialization, I'm generally more a fan of just leaving it alone. So that's honestly fine just as is. Barmaid's tip, that's not even a daily, that just gives you a free extra voyage. Thalmond is similar to the Traveling Merchant, which I'm honestly surprised we didn't see Traveling Merchant at all in here. Maybe I just glossed over it. But the Traveling Merchant is just a good gold sink. It is a daily, but it is a fantastic gold sink in the game. And Thalmond kind of provides a similar role. It also provides really easy access to moonstones. So honestly, it just provides a much needed gold sink, which is again, another one of those things where I'm kind of okay if it's just there and it removes a ton of gold from the game. If it's there just on a weekly basis, hey, at the very least, you're curbing inflation. So honestly, I don't really see it too much of an issue. Helping Meg, I mean, again, that's just kind of free XP, but honestly, you could probably remove Meg and you wouldn't really change all too much. I mean, the whole point of Meg is that she provides just weekly assistance to a bunch of random skills that you could then just use to get access to ports faster. But you could technically remove it, and I don't think you'd really lose out too much. Beyond just where the heck Meg is, because she appears in a few different pieces of content. Replaying Broken Home. I did not realize you could get large prismatic lamps from being able to just do it on a weekly basis. Honestly, I don't think people really do it aside from getting the Asylum Surgeon's Ring. Because that is a long time to be able to get through it, even if you speedrun it, all for either a large or a huge lamp. Which, I mean, a large and a huge lamp are pretty nice, but are a lot more easily accessible through other things. Or just getting the XP through things like regular training. So, honestly, wouldn't be opposed to getting rid of that. Also would not be opposed of getting rid of Silice's endgame things. Just being able to repeat it to be able to get the one-time rewards is fine enough as it is. We don't need any other things here, like prismatic lamps, because good god is it a long quest, even when you remove the maze aspect. Dimension for Disaster. Honestly, probably shouldn't be here, because yes, you do need to replay it quite a few times. Yes, there are time requirements, but there's also only so many silver pennies that you can get. And there's no consumables that you can get from them either. So once you do it a certain amount of times, you just don't get any more stuff from it. So honestly, it's fine just staying as it is. Shattered Worlds. I mean, that is a challenge mode. I mean, that's kind of similar to Rush of Blood. You could just get rid of the challenge mode, I guess, and you wouldn't really lose too much, because you could still do Shattered Worlds just regularly and still earn anima. So, you could probably get rid of it, and probably wouldn't really lose out too much. Let's see, what else is there? The Anachronia Totems is another one. That, if we really wanted to remove the dailies, I think we could just... You build up the totems, and you just always have that effect active. The big change would be the remote totem, which instead of providing any sort of repeatable activity, instead I think it would just have to amplify the effects of the certain totems. How that would exactly work, not entirely sure, but that would be what we would need to do if we were to get rid of this as a daily. Then there's clearing out the water filtration system. That's kind of like a poor man's version of managing miscellanea, if I'm being honest. You just use 20 construction, you use up the materials, and then you get items over time. Just like managing miscellanea. So, not really needed to change anything for that. And then advanced time, that is 100% for balancing purposes, because otherwise, this just becomes really stupidly broken. As can be seen by the fact that you get this stupidly broken aspect of it as a tier 7 relic in leagues. And oh boy, will that just break everything. So yeah, this is not really a daily. This is for balance. And finally, we have the monthly events, which I don't think there's really anything else. I mean, there's the free item from Solomon's store. Hopefully, that just kind of eventually goes away with more microtransaction stuff. And that is pretty much everything here. The only other thing really left that I want to talk about are just daily challenges. And daily challenges, those are probably some of the other big epitome of what exactly a daily is. But I really don't think we should change that. We fought really hard to get those reinstated after Heroes Pass took them out. There are a lot of people that have their line in the sand of, no, I love my dailies. I like getting these small little bits of progress. Leave them alone. And I think that's fine. If we really need to change anything about them, we could probably go back to the old way where you have 5 that you kind of bank, but you get a new one per day, as opposed to just having 3. But honestly, the big thing with daily challenges is that they take like 2 minutes to do. You get a nice chunk of XP and then you move on with your day. Honestly, as far as dailies go, daily challenges are probably some of the more benign, and they really don't take too long. One of the biggest issues that we really see when it comes to people really delving into these dailies is generally the fact that, oh, I just do all my dailies, and now suddenly I played the game for 2 hours. So a lot of this, again, has been trying to see what we can do to trim the fat on dailies. What can we do to modify these to not just be recurring time-based events? We're not obviously getting rid of all of them, but daily challenges, I think, are probably some of the ones that are least affected by this. Just because, again, they're really quick. So, honestly, I think that we are pretty much at the end of this. This actually took a lot longer for me to get through than I realized. But that is what I think we could do if we wanted to try to trim dailies. Obviously, don't get rid of all of them. That's a really bad idea. And don't just say, deal with it, because that's not really helpful. I think we can try to kind of meet in the middle and see if there's any way that we can try to lower the amount of just daily activities that we can do. And I think if we can do that, then that will make the game a lot more appealing, and especially feel a lot less, not really claustrophobic, but a lot less stressful for a lot of people, especially if they're coming from old school and they really want to have really high efficiency, and they see dailies as just a big barrier to that. I think being able to lower the amount of these things that people are confronted with would go a long way to try to make the game a lot more appealing. But what do you think? Do you have any ideas on just other things that we could modify for these? Do you think these ideas would be greatly implemented? Do you think that this is terrible? Or think that you can do better in terms of what we could trim? Go ahead and leave a comment below, and I'll see you all in the next video. So until next time, everyone, take care.